Moving into a new country is like going into a cinema only to catch the second half of a film. The characters have been introduced, their motives laid bare. Elements of the backstory have been established to help us understand the thoughts behind actions. British culture is on another level of complexity, precisely because it takes pride in having many unexplicit customs and hidden rules that govern most aspects of life. What follows is a no-punches-held-back social analysis. Before we start, let me leave a note here. There are many positive qualities of the British culture I'm fond of. Despite everything, it's one of the most multicultural societies on earth today that has created many opportunities for many people. It should also go without saying, when we look at cultural patterns, there will always be individuals who are not well represented by the average. On some days, the English language and the surrounding culture feel almost like cipher locks, giving special access to those who know the codes well, while remaining invisible to those who are outsiders. At times, they work so incredibly well, some are locked out of groups, relations, and opportunities without even realizing there was a lock. A little spoiler here. In a nutshell, this idea is the essence of how the British deal with multiculturalism, which we will circle back to. For example, in Britain, people will use the words supper, tea, and dinner to mean the same thing based on geographical location and, wait for it, social class. For a newcomer, it's easy to learn the choice of this word differs by geography. Here's the tricky part: to get an accurate understanding of how the use of the word informs about social class. Now, that is a more nuanced matter. It requires, going back to our film analogy, to ideally have watched the first part, or if you are a latecomer, to carefully observe the culture over a long period of time. With a keen mind that takes pleasure in social observations, one can mostly catch up. This video certainly serves the same purpose. Before we dive into a super fascinating social analysis, a few things to consider here as a background. As you hear these, I will ask you to think about their broader implications for the British identity today. 1. Britain was, for some time, known as the empire on which the sun never sets. 2. Today, the monarchy is still very much alive and very significant to most people. 3. The British have a sense of ownership and pride around the English language, which is spoken by 1.3 billion people. 4. The still strong narrative taught in schools is that the colonialist influence of Britain on the colonies, including on slavery, were mostly positive and that they nudged the people towards a more civilized way of living. 5. Today in daily life, from nail salons to holidays, most British find themselves being served by people from other nationalities. The opposite is a rare sight. 6. The British pound is highly valuable and acts as leverage. 7. There still exists an Orientalist view of the East, either as an exotic spice to be experienced or a threat to be avoided. Mostly the perception of the East bounces between these two, never being able to settle into some sort of normal neutrality. Now, let's connect some dots. Amidst this background, there is something very bizarre about the culture that can only be described with the idea of doublespeak, popularized by George Orwell's 1984. Doublespeak is the deliberate use of evasive or ambiguous language to obscure or distort meaning. Mild and vague terms are preferred rather than blunt and direct ones. Long, convoluted sentences are formed to disguise the real meaning. Grandiose phrases are used to distract. Take how introductions and random social encounters play out. Even in a networking event in some London pub, which is much more international and a place for commerce, a direct approach where one goes, "Hi, my name is Jim, and I help companies fulfill their sales potentials. Nice to meet you," would be met by silent disapproval. One is expected not to pitch, but rather ease into it, and perhaps drop their name and occupation almost like an afterthought. "Oh, by the way, I'm James. I couldn't catch your name." The sophistication of your doublespeak, which hints at your status, what you do and want without explicitly saying them shows how in tune with the culture you're in. This layered style of communication extends far beyond the daily conversation and all the way into a style of thinking, acting as the logic of how most broader social issues, such as immigration, are approached. On the surface, there will be an explicit meaning draped over the real hidden meaning. For instance, at the explicit level, the UK will announce that it is very welcoming to people of all colors and cultures, but this is a half-truth. In reality, each culture will be mostly concentrated to a specific part of the city's boroughs, having limited social interactions with the other and/or the affluent. Even in the multicultural London, most black people will be squeezed into a few boroughs in East London, for example. The Indian and the Bangladeshi community will be in the outer northwest, while the Japanese will be concentrated around Ealing, having limited interactions with each other. 6 years in the UK, and I've never seen an elderly black lady and white lady walking together arm to arm and sharing laughter. For some reason, it's a hard visual to imagine, and it disturbs and maddens me that it is hard to imagine in ways I can't put into words. As a foreign-born British resident who specialized in culture, I find myself at a particularly advantageous vantage point. Having been raised in Istanbul, a city that prides itself on being a bridge between the East and the West, I came to recognize elements from different cultural mindsets. After living in the UK and observing what I could, I had pleasant surprises, unexpected realizations, and naturally, some disappointments. One of the major disappointments I had was around the perception of non-white, non-Christian, foreign-born people in most areas of social and business life. After I had been exposed to the cultural exports of the UK, the TV dramas, music, films, and influential thinkers I watched on YouTube, there was a picture in my mind. Perhaps naively, I expected that a smidgen more meritocratic and intellectual filtering mechanism would be in place, rather than one that is so strongly based on place of birth. Another hard-to-imagine scene for me, this time from business life, became a startup founder named Matt getting management advice or consultancy from an Eastern raised in a non-Christian culture, no matter how competent they felt. Actually, this one is more than personal speculation, as I have visited and interviewed over 100 London startup founders myself and observed many relations and thought patterns. Again, at the explicit level, all nationalities are invited to take part in life and opportunities in Britain. In reality, there will be a prescribed box of expectations attached with every nationality, such as some should be builders, some should be corner shop owners, some should be delivery drivers, while upper management and well-paying positions are mostly reserved for a different set of people. First the British and then other Western Europeans. Out of 100 FTSE CEOs, only 11 are non-white, even though they're from a European background. Now, can you imagine the number of hyper-qualified and talented people who have come to the UK that are not white and not European? Where are they? In fact, there's a very specific hierarchy of nationalities in the British mind that puts Western Europeans such as the French and German at the top, Pakistanis and Bangladeshi and Nigerians towards the bottom, and every other nation in between, but more on that in a later video. Most don't let go of power willingly. So for those who don't think like world citizens, which is most people, it feels like a silent tug of war over economic and political influence between the British and the rest. The stereotypes around the place of birth almost act like ID cards with different clearance levels. They shape how people judge you at pivotal moments like job applications or business meetings. Here's a scene I can easily imagine: a British boss outsourcing a manual low-value part of their operations to a company or group of individuals that have come to the UK from low-income countries and now live here. Perhaps they are now full UK citizens, but are still locked in the same hierarchy of nations. So here's the full picture taking shape. Like a honey trap, the UK is highly welcoming to people from all around the world. Formally, you can do anything. The TV shows and the cultural exports will prove that. But once you're in, there's a specific social class assigned to you that is heavily influenced by your place of birth. At least this influence is much bigger than it should be. It is felt by all, but more by the people who were not born on English-speaking or Christian countries. One should always believe in their potential to break free of these limitations, but this here is the lay of the land to be carefully navigated. And this sums up how the British deal with multiculturalism. On the surface, the doublespeak provides a perfect defense shield against any claims of overt racism or bias, yet every nationality is expected to know their place, an idea that for sure has its roots in how the British royalty positions itself within its own people. This is also perhaps the least US-like aspect of how the UK deals with multiculturalism. To me, an outsider to the US at least, it seems vertical mobility through becoming rich overrides other factors. In the UK, even if you become financially very well off, there's always the chance that you would be ridiculed for not coming from old money. As a final but important observation, we mistakenly think there was a definable British culture as a closed box, then the foreigners came and looked at this box and tried to understand what was inside. I'm more and more convinced this is the wrong way to think about this. What happened indeed was, over the last 100 years, the British culture has adapted and evolved around the reality of immigration. Perhaps it was the only way it could have survived all these years, keeping some sort of identity by isolating, ciphering, and layering itself. It's quite smart if you think about it. You allow in people from different parts of the world which support the service economy. You get to claim you're a multicultural mosaic, but still protect the old Britishness by layering and coding it into hard-to-crack cultural codes, a difficult-to-imitate accent, and peculiar British ways of doing things. In one way, it really is multicultural, welcoming, and embracing. On the other hand, there's always a palpable feeling that occupying the same physical space doesn't mean occupying the same life. It is an amusingly rich solution, yet feels outdated today, where we need more real connections. You've been listening to The Pantheon. If you found this valuable, consider subscribing for more out-of-the-box thinking on human behavior, economy, gaming, society, psychology, and more.